Evening.
Evening.
May I ring that up for you?
Yes, please.
Have a good evening.
Repeat after me. I.
A.
B. And C.
C. A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
No, not good. Not good.
Just the sounds that words make.
Cat, dog, calamari. Yeah. Trash on the beach.
Good.
Farm fresh. My son and I mowed the grass.
That's a gold star. Unbelievable.
Dad,
Hey, Tubbs, I read your book.
you read my book.
Nowadays, reading has become a common and widespread habit. All generations, for different necessities, spend some time reading. We read newspapers for getting information about the surrounding world. We read for studying or walking, or we read as a leisure activity. The habit of reading, intended as an amusing activity, came to light in the 18th century. At that time, in fact, literacy became part of the basic education for children. Also, the spread of libraries and cheaper books exchanges helped the development of the reading habit among the middle class. Anyway, the first cause of this development is traced to the social and economical growth of the middle class, which needed to be exalted as in the masterpieces of Defoe, or to be portrayed with its vices, giving the upper classes a specific message. Bourgeoisie had risen as the new leading class with its enterprise and productivity. Among the kinds of novel genre that developed in that social contest, there was the picaresque novel. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, a picaresque novel is a novel relating to an episodic style of fiction, dealing with the adventures of a rough and dishonest but appealing hero, who travels from place to place. But before analyzing the features it assumed in England during the 18th century, let's look back to the previous models that were inspiring sources for authors as Fielding.
Since the picaresque novels contains very human features, as it represents heroes taken by the daily world, the characters portrayed came from the great classics, though they underwent a progressive evolution which brought to the creation of the modern Picaro. In the ancient Rome, Plautus, one of the most successful Romance comedy writers, created a new kind of character in these comedies, the cunning servant, a character full of enterprise, who succeeded in solving the most complicated situations thanks to his shrewdness, as Tom Jones avoided troubles thanks to his intelligence. Moreover, Petronius, some centuries later, created the character of Enclopius, a gladiator who undergoes several adventures to gain freedom. Another model was the metamorphosis of Apuleius. In its episodic structure, the picaresque novel resembles the long, rambling romances of medieval chivalry, to which it provided the first realistic counterpart. Unlike the idealistic knight-errant hero, however, the Picaro is a cynical and amoral rascal who, if given half a chance, would rather live by his wits than by honorable work. The Picaro wanders about and has adventures among people from all social classes and professions, often just barely escaping punishment for his own lying, cheating and stealing. He is a casteless outsider who feels unworthy and restrained by prevailing social codes and mores, and he conforms outwardly to them only when it serves his own ends. The Picaro's narrative becomes, in effect, an ironic or satirical survey of the hypocrisies and corruptions of the society, while also offering the reader a rich mine of observations concerning people in low or humble walks of life. The theme of the reckless and human hero was abandoned in the Middle Age until an author as Chaucer rediscovered immorality, vices, and human weaknesses in his works, thus paving the way for the creation of characters with closer features to Fielding's Swan, who take part to dangerous but adventurous journeys which are used to describe society. Anyway, the modern Picaresque begins with the Lazarillo de Tormes, which was published anonymously in 1554 in Medina del Campo. It is variously considered either the first Picaresque novel or at least the antecedent of the genre.
The protagonist, Lazzaro, featherless and of humble origins, is immediately put at the service of a blind. Subsequently became the servant of a churchman. Then he served an impoverished nobleman, and finally is put at the service of a monk. Even if all his masters are profiteers and cruel, Lazzaro is able to develop a strong survival instinct, and these adventures allow him to know how the world is cruel and to present the reader a description of the Spanish society of the time.
Lazarillo de Tormes lives in an effort with his wits to survive and succeed in an impoverished country full of hypocrisy. As a Picaro character, he is an alienated outsider whose ability to expose and ridicule individuals gave him a revolutionary stance. Lazzaro states that the motivation of his writing is to communicate his experience of overcoming deception, hypocrisy, and falsehood.
The next Picaresque novel to be published, Mateo Alemán's Guzmán del Farage, became the true prototype of the genre and helped to establish realism as the dominant trend in the Spanish novel. The supposed autobiography of the son of the ruined Genoese moneylender, this work is richer in invention, variety of episode and presentation of character than Lazarillo and it, to enjoy the extraordinary popularity. After these authors, the most remarkable English Picaresque novelist was Harry Fielding, whose life will briefly summarize.
Hi guys, I'm hearing your presentation on the Picaresque novel and me. Till now, you've done a good job, and I'm glad of you. But now, it's time of talking about me, and, if you don't mind, I'll tell you something about my life. I was born on April 22, 1707, in Sharpen Park, Somerset, England. I attended Eton College when I studied classical authors, the ones you hate so much, and emerged ready to tackle the literary world. Finished my first play in 1728, in the span of a decade I wrote about a dozen of others. Then I enrolled at the University of Leiden in Holland, but returned to London in 1729 because my family had financial troubles. Unable to find meaningful work, I began studying law at Middle Temple and became a barrister. In the meantime, I married Charlotte Craddock and edited Champion, or British Mercury, a satirical political publication. In 1714, Samuel Richardson published Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, which was an instant success. However, I really hated Richardson. He was miserable, since he was a stubborn supporter of tradition and strict moral code. So I wrote a parody of it. What a joke that was. I called it an apology for the life of Mrs. Shamel Andrews, although I published the book anonymously because of the harsh critics of the society. Anyway, then I wrote Joseph Andrews, another parody published anonymously, and the history of the life of Mr. Jonathan Wild the Great. Despite my productivity, my life was marked by significant personal losses in those years. My father passed away in 1741, followed by one of my daughters in 1742, and my wife in 1744. I married my wife's maid in 1747, and after a period of grieving. My legal training was at least put to good use in the late 1740s, when I was appointed Justice of the Peace for Westminster and the Magistrate of Middlesex. Although I devoted significant energy to combating crime, I delivered celebrated The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling, in 1749, a work considered one of the English language's great early novels. The Sombre Amelia, my final novel, was published in 1751. My health was in serious decline by this point. I travelled by sea to Portugal with my wife and daughter in the summer of 1754, but never returned to England, as I passed away in Lisbon October 8th of that year. But now I've spoken too much. It's your turn now, and I entrust you, Thomas and Pietro, the task of telling something about the features of my production. Be aware, I'll protest whether you make any mistake.
Features of the production. Commentators on the novel generally preferred Richardson's serious and ambiguous piety to Fielding's comic moral vision throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. His sympathy with the lower classes and his critical depiction of the justice system won him the scorn of most of his contemporaries, who found his writing coarse and his characters base. Not until early in the 20th century did critics begin to appreciate Fielding's literary skill, which had in part been overshadowed by inaccurate biographies portraying Fielding as a licentious drunkard. More recent criticism has explored Fielding's complex value system. Martin Price suggests that Fielding's so-called low characters contribute to his definition of virtue, and Martin Battistine examines the character of Sophia Western as an example of Fielding's nuanced moral code. The influence of Fielding's theatrical training has also been the subject of scholarly inquiry. Alan Mackenzie examines the theatrical displays of passion in Fielding's novels, and in Jonathan Wild, and Sheridan Baker describes in some detail how plot devices and themes from Fielding's plays were transplanted into his fiction. The rich realism of Fielding's fiction has encouraged scholars to examine his work in its cultural context, as exemplified both in Michael McKeown's study of Fielding's work and in James Thompson's essay on Tom Jones and economic history. Critics continue to debate the influences and effects of Fielding's innovative narrative techniques. Some focuses on its connection to classical traditions, others emphasizing Fielding's skillful exploitation of the developing novel genre, which himself helped bring into being.
Anyway, another important factor to analyze Fielding's production is the satire. In fact, he is considered the creator of comic epic novel, and thanks to irony, he criticized the strict moral of the time still bound to religious beliefs. Even if the satire production of Fielding wasn't as sharp as Swift's one, some of his works caused Walpole's resignation. In his Picaresque novel, he manifested his interest for social condition. In fact, thanks to the journey of his characters and to the people they met, he described the English society of the time and denounced their condition. Fielding didn't denounce human instinct because he thought that men have an inclination for goodness. Also, we must say that Fielding's works are epic in style. They contain fable and action as every epic poem, but they were different from Iliad and Aeneid, and also different from the production of Defoe and Richardson, because the plot has a very organic unit.
Thank you, Thomas and Pietro. I hope the teacher will agree with me that you studied. But now, let's hear the plots of my main works. Pietro and Antonio, you can proceed.
Shyamala is written as a shocking revelation of the true events which took place in the life of Pamela Andrews. From Shyamala we learn that instead of being a kind, humble and chaste servant's girl, Pamela, whose real name turns out to be Shyamala, is a wicked creature and former prostitute who tried to entrap her master into a marriage. The exact opposite of the virtuous Richardson Pamela character, endowed with a Puritan moral code.
The novel is based on the events of Pamela's brother, heroine of Richardson's epistolary novel. Joseph Andrews is an usher in the house of the respectable family of the Boobies. In order to escape from her lady's lustful temptations, he leaves for a long journey with a Christian priest, Mr. Adams, who has no worldly experience. Because of their different moral, they don't get on throughout the journey.
Amelia is a domestic novel taking place largely in London in 1733. It describes the hardships suffered by a young couple newly married. Against her mother's wishes, Amelia marries Captain William Boff. They run away to London. Afterwards, William is unjustly imprisoned and seduced by Miss Matthews. During this time, Amelia has a carriage accident and ruined her nose. Amelia, unlike William, resists at the detention paid to her by several men and stays faithful to him, also after his betrayal. He was exonerated and next imprisoned again because of debt, but thanks to a fortune left by her mother, the debt being settled and the couple retires to the country.
Thank you both. And now, it's time Marco tells you something about the plot of my main work, Tom Jones.
Tom Jones is made up of 3 parts, each consisting of 6 books, divided into numerous chapters. The full title of the book is The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling. The first part begins with the discovery of a baby boy in the bed of Mr. Allorty, a rich and benevolent gentleman, who decides to adopt him, giving it the name Tom Jones. Tom is a generous creature, full of vital energy and impulses, and he grows up with Blifil, son of Mr. Allorty's sister, Mr. Brigitte, who dies very young. Blifil, on the contrary, is a mean, odious hypocrite, and constantly seeks to harm Tom. When nearly 20, Tom falls in love with his neighbor's daughter, the lovely Sophia Western, and she with him. But their relationship is opposed by her father, who refuses the idea of marrying his daughter to a foundling. Blifil, who wants to marry Sophia, spreads lies about Tom, who is then compelled to leave Mr. Allorty's house. The second part deals with the adventures Tom has to face on the road to London, and a host of new characters encountered. It also describes Sophia's perilous journey to the capital in search of Tom, after escaping from her house for fear of marrying Blifil. The third part is set in London, where the major characters meet and where Tom's true identity is discovered. Tom is the illegitimate son of Mr. Brigitte and can happily marry Sophia. Blifil, who hid the truth about Tom's birth from Mr. Allorty, is thrown out of the state.
Themes: human nature. The narrator explains to the reader in the opening chapter that human nature is the main provision on offer. He does not intend to make any judgments on human nature, but instead wants to present it as a dish would be offered on a menu. Much of the criticism of Tom Jones was in response to the licentio's behavior of characters such as Molly Seagrim, Mrs. Waters, and Lady Bellaston, not to mention Tom Jones himself. However, Fielding did not want to create a necessarily moral text that ignored the truth of how people are. He believed human nature has capacity for good and evil, and wanted to explore those contradictions. Further, it is important to note that Fielding was not advocating or defending any of the moral behaviors of his characters, but merely presenting their actions as steps on the road to greater wisdom. Indeed, each of the major characters already mentioned undergoes a learning process, and redemption is offered to anyone who seeks it. In other words, through Tom he expresses his belief that even good men falter, but from folly, not necessarily from evil. Of all the weaknesses of mankind, Fielding viewed hypocrisy as the most pernicious and damaging. The novel seeks to highlight hypocrisy across the social spectrum through the lens of humor. Gaudy Seagrim condemns Molly for falling pregnant, yet it is revealed that she gave birth within a week of her own marriage. Further, we discover later that she shared in the profits of iniquity with her daughter, after Molly's relationship with Mr. Square is exposed. The hypocrisy of the lower class is further illustrated when fair Molly is viciously attacked in the churchyard after attending church in a fine dress. They are driven by envy, but disguise it in moral tones to justify their ire. Marriage. Fielding was an advocate of a balanced and happy marriage. He began the novel shortly after the death of his first wife, Charlotte Craddock, and his deep affection for her is embodied in the character of Sophia. He hopes to immortalize the memory of Charlotte through Sophia. The institution of marriage is, like the book's other issues, explored through each strata of society. Jealousy and unsuitability abound, and their destructive effects almost force the story to an ultimately end. Fielding employs an allusion to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet in Sophia's threat to stab herself in the heart, rather than marry Blifil, and the squire's own threat to cast her out if she doesn't. The reader can see the irony here, in that the story is brought dangerously close to tragedy of this issue. It is only resolved when the lovers are allowed to be together, and this is only enabled by a change in their circumstances, not their affections. The potential for marriage to engender tragedy remains, even if our heroes escape it through fortunate revelations. Before the novel was completed, Fielding had married Mary Daniel, his housekeeper. She was pregnant by him, and Fielding braved a public scandal to stand by her. Through the relationship of Nightingale and Nancy Miller, the novel reflects the potential for happiness opposed to the socially accepted actions. Contrast. Fielding celebrates the contrast evident in English pantomime and employs this effectively through the novel. This is manifest both through the opposing settings of the country and the city, and through the characters and action. The first characters we see in opposition to one another are Tuacum and Squire. Their outlooks and philosophies are at best complementary, at worst diametrically opposed. Molly and Sophia are both objects of Tom's affection, though not, of course, simultaneously, and yet have very different qualities. Molly is passionate, forthright, and appeals to Tom's physical yearnings, but Sophia rules both his heart and head. Even within the tone of the text, it is possible to distinguish contrast throughout the narration of Tom's adventures. Fielding himself was a Protestant latitudinarian. This largely means that he believed humanity was able to demonstrate both good and evil, and was free to choose their own direction. His use of contrast in the novel reflects this philosophy as Tom discovers through his successes and mistakes the path to happiness. Fortune. The narrator often directs the reader to some event or reaction which is prompted by fortune. Fortune is personified in the text as if it is a physical entity or active constituent of the plot. It is not viewed as a supernatural force. Fielding goes to great pains to condemn the use of supernatural devices as a simple solution to challenges of plot or characterization. Instead, Fortune describes how a character's own qualities are projected into events and situations. Wisdom. Wisdom is Tom's ultimate goal, even if he doesn't initially realize it. Once he attains wisdom, he reaches the end of his journey and the path is open towards Sophia. In particular, his wisdom lies in accepting that he, not fortune, determines his path. Tom's adventures allow him to amass wisdom. His relationship with Molly teaches him that women may not be constant. There are also positive lessons that facilitate Tom's ultimate wisdom. Simple kindness, such as he shows to the beggar and the highwayman, can bring rich rewards. Love can remain constant despite adversity. He wins his Sophia in the end. Tom's experiences in London impart further wisdom. He learns of the predatory nature of ladies such as Lady Bellaston. Nightingale teaches Tom how to navigate polite society, and is rescued from penury by the intervention of friends he had loyally supported. Perhaps Tom's greatest lesson is to respect himself and those around him. The end of the novel reveals the root of Tom and Sophia's successful and enduring union. Fielding certainly wants us to remember, though, that even the wisest of men is prone to lapses in wisdom.
After all, Fielding believes that humans can be either good or evil, and their original intentions can be contrasting and misleading. Even the most honest commit immoral actions, but in the end, there are no heroes, princes or philosophers upon earth. We are going to read a significant passage from the 5th chapter of Tom Jones.
Heroes, notwithstanding the high ideas, which by the means of flatterers they may entertain of themselves, or the world may conceive of them, have certainly more of mortal than divine about them.
Gli eroi, nonostante l'alta opinione di se stessi che possono nutrire grazie agli adulatori, sono certo più mortali che divini.
Heroes are common people. According to Fielding, men are equal to other mortals. However elevated their minds may be, their bodies at least, which is much the major part of most, are liable to the worst infirmities, and subject to the vilest offices of human nature.
Per quanto sublime sia il loro animo, perlomeno il corpo, che è di gran lunga la parte più importante, è esposto alle peggiori infermità e soggetto alle più vili necessità della natura umana.
In fact, heroes are subject to diseases and to the necessities imposed by their human nature. To say the truth, no known inhabitant of this globe is really more than a man. So none need be ashamed of submitting to what the necessities of man demand.
A dire il vero, siccome ogni abitante di questo globo non è che un semplice uomo, non occorre che nessuno si vergogni di sottomettersi a ciò che richiedono le necessità della natura umana.
Fielding destroys differences among men. None of them is better or deserves to be considered superior. Subsequently, also moral and other factors which determine differences among social classes, sexual genders, or races have no rational explanation. This is the legacy of Fielding. Every human being, with his good and bad actions, is still a free man, that no one has the right to judge, condemn, or discriminate.
Well, I wonder you've given such a good interpretation of my opinion on the mankind. I didn't expect you to be so good at this. But now, it's time for me to go and come back in my age. I'm working on a new novel and you have been so inspiring for me. Goodbye everybody, and thank you for your attention.